I'm getting ready for my interview and resume preparation. So I better start with a blank piece of paper and write all the good stuff about me. All right? Because I know what I'm good at. I want to be ready to talk about it. Forget that. That's one of the first changes. That's one of the first changes. It's not about you. It's about them.
Hi, this is Brad Henry. On the podcast, we have stories about the underdog. I've had a lot of victory, but more tragedy in my life has made me very compassionate and perceptive on those who struggle, but those who are not willing to give up. And these stories will hopefully inspire you to become more and be more in life, to give you hope, to know that victory can be right around the corner. And hopefully today's story will be that one to put you in a great mindset to know that everything in life is attainable with persistence and hope. So thank you for listening today, and I think you will really enjoy our channel. Folks, today I have Artie Limworth on with me, and he's done a number of podcasts with me because of his wisdom, tenacity, and love for life. Artie, great to have you on today. We're going to be talking about ways to get a job.
Right. Well, a pleasure to be on this with you, and I hope our listeners will be enjoying what we're going to cover. In fact, today will be the first of 3 podcasts. We're making a series. Today, we're going to talk about preparation at home, knowing you're looking for a job or an opportunity. How do you prepare at home to be best ready for both the interview itself as well as getting the best resume you can? The second podcast we'll do will be what I consider the 5 important stages of an interview and how you can ace each of those 5 stages so you come out on top. The third and last in this series will be how to make your resume pop, how to make it stand out from the crowd. And everybody says, well, I got to start with the resume. But you'll see after you listen to the first 2 podcasts how when you know the fundamentals that we'll be beginning with today, the resume really becomes almost a copy paste, kind of put some pieces together, and it becomes quite easy. But you need to know where you're heading and what we're going to do. And a few preliminaries, Brad, for your listeners. One, it's not just about getting a job, thinking like I'm unemployed and I need a job. It's also for those in the workforce that are at any point in a competitive environment to look for that next opportunity. Maybe their peers are also looking for that next opportunity. How do you stand out? How do you get what you're looking for your own career growth and satisfaction by being best prepared for interviews and resumes? And lastly, it's not just people in the workforce. I've used this to help folks that are high school graduates getting ready for college and college entrance and applications. For those who've got the college degree and going on for advanced studies like lawyers or doctors. In fact, Brad, let me give you a quick story. I do this for lots of folks for many years, and my nephew, his grandfather was a doctor. He was enamored with the medical profession. He was a volunteer EMT with the emergency rescue squad, was comfortable with blood and guts and crisis management stuff. Wonderful grades, but for a year he had been applying to medical school without any success. And he said, something's not clicking. Artie, I know you do this stuff, Uncle Artie. Maybe you can give me some help. We sat down, much like these podcasts are going to do for your listeners. And within a couple hours, we went through what we'll be covering in the course of these 3 podcasts. Long story short, he felt so confident with what he had, he was ready for his next interview, and he got accepted to the first medical school after a year of failed applications. But the best part, Brad, and I'm so proud of him for this, he said, Artie, now that I know what I was doing wrong, goosebump moment, I'm not going to accept that med school. I can get to a better one. And he held out. He used the principles we talked about, we'll talk about today,
Oh,
and he got into the med school of his choice. And today, 10, 15 years later, he's a doctor. He's doing what he wanted to do. These tips work. I teach a process. We'll cover it in this podcast. I'm assuming for all we'll talk about that a person knows this is the job that I'm looking for. This is my career focus, but not everybody's there yet. So let me just make a quick side comment. There's a good book, and maybe you'll put it up on the screen later, called What Color is Your Parachute? And it's a process for self-evaluation in 7 different categories, values in your life to help you focus on what you're good at, what your skills are, what your knowledge is, what kind of work environment you want to be in, what kind of salary you're looking for, what kind of geography you're looking for. And as you build all of these pieces of the puzzle together, it helps put together the center focus for you and your career. So if you're not yet ready to know exactly where you want to go, that would be a good book to get started.
And I can't wait to hear what the difference was with your
The nephew?
nephew getting, yeah, I can't wait to hear that.
Well,
That's part of the principles you'll be talking about.
exactly right. In just a moment. And as long as we're talking books, let me just make a quick plug for a couple books. All of what we'll talk about today, and I know you'll put some links later for folks. There's a
Yeah.
lot more detail on tips for resumes and interviews all in 1 hour. It's a quick booklet, and then the other one is thicker, but it has more information about life and leadership as well as interviewing techniques. As some of your listeners already know, my royalties go to charities. I'm not trying to push book sales just to make more money for Artie Linworth. I'm pushing book sales because I want to help you, your listeners. Let's jump into it. I have a quote I like to get started with, and Brad, you may be my straight man on some of this because I'm assuming I'm talking to an audience, but they don't get to talk back while we're chatting. So I
Right.
want to put up a quote that I'd like to have you and our listeners think about as we
Okay.
jump into what do you do as you're preparing for home and what's going to differentiate ourselves. So here's the quote. It says, he or she who gets hired is not necessarily the one who can do that job best, but the one who knows the most about how to get hired. And this quote actually
Um,
came from that What Color is Your Parachute book by Richard Boyles. But when you see that quote, what comes to your mind, Brad, about being ready for interviews or resume writing?
well, I interviewed Kenny Wallace, an NASCAR driver, on a podcast, and he said that Dick Trickle, which was an amazing driver, said to him, in order to win, you have to at least finish the race. So, you can wreck out, you can do all these types of things, but if you don't finish, you never have a chance to win. So that's kind of what struck in my mind after reading that is that, man, stay the course, don't give up. Um,
Right. And I got to think one other thing using this analogy with the racetrack, in order to finish, you have to follow the track. You got to know where you're going,
he,
right? And I
uh,
think part of this key to this quote is that we all may think we're on the right track, like my nephew and many of your listeners and others. I think this is what I got to do. But if you don't really know where you're going, you're never going to get to the finish line. So let's talk about what that path is. What can we do to be better equipped to play the game, let's call it, to know what's expected? And what a lot of folks do is, they begin with a blank piece of paper. I'm getting ready for my interview and resume preparation. So I better start with a blank piece of paper and write all the good stuff about me. All right? Because I know what I'm good at. I want to be ready to talk about it. Forget that. That's one of the first changes. That's one of the first changes. It's not about you. It's about them. It's not about.
whoa.
So now let me explain that. They're buying, I'm selling. And if they're looking for a race car, I better not be selling them an old jalopy. All right? Know what they want. And what do they want? What they want is people who in their company can solve the problems they face with key skills for success in that job. So there's three concepts we're going to talk about today in terms of at-home preparation. The first is every job has key skills for success. The second is past behavior is the best predictor of future
Wow.
performance. And the third key is how to be a star communicator. How, when you finally know what you want to talk about, how do you talk about it in an effective way that resonates with them? So let's take these three pieces one at a time. The first, every job has key skills for success. So it doesn't matter. I love my props. It doesn't matter whether you're a hamburger flipper at a fast food joint, a carpenter, or if I had a sharp knife, I'd say a doctor or a surgeon. Every job has key skills for success. And if I'm the boss of this company, I need to first be thinking about it. And in my book, I talk about both sides of the table, the interviewer, the interviewee. The interviewer needs to know, and normally they do, what they consider to be key skills for success. So that's what they're going to be looking to find in the best candidates. It's
Yeah.
kind of like when we're in school, we're taking a test, we like history, and the teacher's going to give us the final exam. It's not about me, what I like in history. Gee, I really like the space race. That was an interesting part of American history. But if the teacher's going to be asking me about the Civil War and World War II to talk about all of that kind of stress and change and world dynamics, doesn't do me much good to be preparing my sheet about the space race. Okay? So I need to get in the head of them. It's not about me, it's about them. What are the skills they're interested in learning about me? And then I prepare myself with those skills. So
Wow.
let's play some quick games. You know,
Sure.
you're gonna be my guinea pig. I'll start with an easy one for you, Brad. What are key skills for success as a commercial airline pilot?
Calmness, focus, enjoying what you do.
That's
That
a
is,
great one, Brad.
every time we had a procedure, as every airline pilot does, you head down the runway, and normally, depending on temperature and weight, you take off around 120 to 140, and you call V1, and which is a certain speed, and then rotate. And when you rotate and the wheels come off the ground and you have a positive rate, you're going up, you say positive rate, and then the gear comes up. Every time the gear would come up, it felt like I was free, free as a world.
So part of that process, if you're being prepared to take an interview, you can anticipate somebody may be asking you about your calmness under pressure, your focus, and perhaps they'll be asking you, why do you want to do this job? Why are you the right person for me? So that what we're going to talk about is that first step of preparing for job interviews and resume writing is getting your head into their head, thinking, what are they going to be asking me about key skills for success? So we did one that was easy for you. It was being an airline commercial pilot. You know what you want to talk about. Not everybody knows all of the different jobs. So just for the fun of it, let's pick another one, like tax accountant.
Oh,
What might be, that's a good reaction. I like that. What might be key skills for success as a tax accountant?
uh, possibly past history on detail. About the only thing I can think of because
Okay.
that would give me a migraine doing that type of job.
Good. All right. So this is the idea. The first step is to make the list. Now, just to play this out, if you said to yourself, "Hey, that's the main thing, attention to detail. I'm ready for the interview." More than likely, Brad, they're going to ask you about a few other skills. Okay. So here becomes the challenge. The challenge is in preparation, what not everybody does, is to force yourself to generate a long list of possible skills for success. Then you can weed it down. It's a half-hour interview, at most an hour. They're not going to ask you 4,582 questions about different skills, but they are going to ask you more than one. And they might ask you six or eight or 10. And we'll talk about when we get into the interview podcast about how to make sure you have the opportunity to tell about the most skills. But in preparation, you want to list the most skills, evaluate them, and like we talked in time management, to prioritize the ones they're most likely to ask you about. What's the history teacher going to likely ask you about, not just what you're interested in? So the first step is thinking about them, not you. What are the skills they're likely to ask me about, and how do I generate a long list of skills? How do I brainstorm a long list? The first thing is to just use your own head. Think about it. Okay, here's a bunch of skills that I might consider they're interested in. What, Brad, might be other ways when your head kind of exhausts a list? Well, I've thought about 10 different skills that end up being possible candidates for this job. What do I need to prepare for? How else, when you run dry, might you find other ideas for skills for success in that job? Where would you look to get more ideas for skills?
That is a great question. I'm kind of clueless.
The internet. It's as simple as saying, I've done this many times with people I'm coaching, is just write down what are key skills for success in X? What are key skills for success in fast food joints? What are key skills for success in commercial airline pilots? What are key skills for success in tax accountants? Pick the career you're interested in and see what's generated by the internet. And you get lots of ideas. So you put them on your list. They may or may not be asking you questions. And if you see some items that you hadn't even thought about, ooh, I better think about this ahead of time, right? And then I'll give you some tricks about other ways to get more on the list. Because the first step is getting a long list. Then we'll pare it down. So there's what you get off the top of your head. It's what you get from the internet. What you get from the job description. I mean, it's almost like the teacher said, here's what we're going to test you on your final exam. It's going to be the Civil War, World War II, and other great challenges that our nation faced. Okay? The job description normally says we're looking for someone with this background who's good in these things. So they've almost given you, that's the 80-20 Pareto analysis. They've probably told you 80% of what they're going to start asking you about when you
Right.
get to the interview or when they start screening resumes. They'll be looking for those skills. They've advertised, we want somebody who's good in these skills.
Yeah.
So you need to show them you're good in those skills. So to wrap up on the skills list, you have your own brainstorming, you have the internet, you have the job description. Another way is to talk to people who are in that field.
Ah.
And even better, talk to people who are in that company.
Ah. Yes.
Again, so now I got 5 dimensions
Yeah.
of lists. I've now gone from one skill, attention to detail, probably to 30, 40, 50 skills. That's good. All right. I'm going to give you a few more tips of how to keep slicing that salami, keep peeling the onion so that you can get more skills. I want you to have, as you're preparing, the longest list possible, then you can pare it down to the most important. So most of what we've already talked about, I'll call technical skills for the job. You need to know FAA rules, you need to know tax law. You need to pay attention to detail. You need to be focused, you need to be calm under pressure. They're very technical for that job. I'm going to give you another one, and I think you'll see where I'm coming from. I'm going to call them environmental or ambient characteristics for the job. Not necessarily technical, but it has to do with the culture, the kind of work, like travel. I'll give you a quick personal example. The first half of my career, I was responsible for manufacturing plants around the USA, chemical manufacturing plants. It's a 24/7 job. The plants never stop. So it would be typical at 3 o'clock in the morning, get a call. Hey, the plant's down. We got to go and do
Oh.
something. So, all right, Margie, I'll see you when I can get back. Kiss my wife goodbye. 3 o'clock in the morning, bleary-eyed, go into the plant and try to help and work and solve a problem. Long as the day might be, I'd normally be back home that night, that day. Mid-career, my job changed to become a vice president of a global plastics division in our company. And overnight, my job changed from 24/7 to 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, traveling around the USA and the world. And I liken that to your airline pilot job. So I'm going to ask you again, if you made a list of key skills for success, wouldn't one of them be the ability to be traveling away from home a lot? And if you weren't
Oh,
capable of doing that,
absolutely.
see, that can be a make or break skill. And if I'm an interviewer for an airline pilot or a
Yeah,
global executive,
yeah.
I'm going to say, tell me about your ability to handle being away from home.
Uh,
And that's not a technical skill. I'm calling it an environmental skill. It has to do with the environment about where you work. Travel, culture, working alone, working in a team, those are not technical skills. They're the environment in which you work. And that needs to be on your list because they might ask you a question. If I'm the boss of that kind of an organization, I'm going to ask that kind of a question because I want to make sure they're not just good at technical stuff. They can handle our culture, they can handle the nature of the job if travel's involved. One of the other areas would be what I call generic skills. What's a generic skill? We just talked about an airline pilot, a tax accountant, whatever. But there are some skills, Brad, that apply for almost any job. So I better be prepared for that kind of a question too. It's not just this job, it could be any job. Any come to mind to you about what might be what I'm calling a generic skill, a skill that probably is important no matter what job you work in?
Humility,
Yeah, yeah,
um,
that could be one. Okay.
being open to other suggestions, not thinking that you have the right answer to everything.
Absolutely right, because we're solving problems and things are changing. And if we do it my way or the highway,
Yep.
we're not likely to get the best solution and get the best results. Let me just throw out a few others for our listeners and to be thinking about. How about initiative? The ability to see a need and not have the boss spoon feed you and say, Brad, you need to do this tomorrow.
That's a great one because I believe you either have initiative or you don't.
Absolutely right. Absolutely. I'll tell you a quick story. I had an interview with a young man, and this in a way jumps into the next topic is past behavior is the best predictor of future performance. Skills is the first one. You want to generate a big list, so you look at your technical skills, you look at your ambient skills, environmental skills, and you look at your generic skills. And in the interviewing process, how am I going to forecast how someone is in the future? I got to look at their past behavior. How do they do in the past? And you mentioned that in the very beginning. I always ask a question about initiative because they either have it or they don't. And they can talk about it or they can't. And I'm going to ask them very specifically, not like, how would you handle this in the future? That's motherhood and apple pie. I'm going to say, how did you handle it in the past? So my question to this young interviewee was, give me an example from your past where you took initiative, where the boss didn't tell you what was needed, but you saw a need and you took action. So the guy looks at me and he goes, initiative, initiative. I'm watching the sweat start to form on the brow. Initiative. Then he says to me, ah, yeah, yeah, yeah. 2 years ago, I had this. Exactly. So, you know what my next question was, Brad? Give me another example.
Wow.
I'm getting goosebumps again.
That,
So I said to the young man, well, all right, that's a good example. Give me another one. I was patient, I was polite while he squirmed and came with no answer. And I said, all right, let's move on. I already wrote him off. I finished the interview in a professional way, but he was never going to work for me. That's a generic skill initiative that ought to be on your list. And you better have some stories if you have them. If not, think harder. A few other quick ones, and then we're going to move on. Is things like ability to learn fast, especially for people in transition. You're coming from the military and you want to get some job in industry. It's a transition skill. You got to show that you're pay attention to detail, you're good under pressure, you make a good pilot. You can follow orders well, You can take initiative so long as they're within the binds and rules and regulations of the environment. Learning fast is a generic skill. And it's especially good when you're applying for something that's a little out of your field and someone says, I'm afraid you're not really qualified for this. Well, hold on. I'm a fast learner. Let me give you some good examples from my past where I've done that. So we've done two of the three key steps in preparation. One is think of the skills list, generate a long list from the technical, from the ambient, from the generic, boil them down to maybe 10 or 12, mostly technical and a few of the generic. Know that they're going to ask you about your past performance if they're a good interviewer. So you want to go and think about when have I been good at those skills and how can I communicate it? So now it's all about being a star communicator. And I'm going to give you another quick quote. One we're all familiar with. A picture's worth 1,000 words. What's that mean? You see the picture, and all of a sudden you don't have to be told 1,000 words. You got the big view.
Yeah.
There's a book by, let me get the right author's name, Annette Simons, who's called The Story Factor. When you're in an interview, you're telling stories about your past behavior with certain skills. We're all leading up to you telling your story. So what I'm going to teach now is how to tell a good story. Doesn't mean lie, it means how to communicate effectively, how to tell a good story. And she says, a picture's worth 1,000 words. You know what a story's worth? 1,000 pictures.
Whoa.
A story is worth 1,000 pictures. Why? Because it is so much more than a
Yeah.
two-dimensional picture. It engages the brain and engages the heart. A good story engages both and becomes memorable, impactful, poignant, and sticks with you. That's what you want your stories to be. And it's all about delivery. It's all about flow in the story. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in podcast number 2, dealing with the interview and when you tell your star story. So for those of you who are taking notes, get your pencil. STAR. I use the word STAR for a reason. I didn't make up STAR. This is a traditional behavioral interviewing acronym. It's a way to remember how to tell your story. S.T.A.R. S stands for situation. T stands for task, goal, objective. A stands for actions, plural. And I'll go through each of these in detail. R stands for result. So you're going to tell your story from start to finish following that flow. And there's a reason that the flow is important. You don't just jump around. Tell me an example when you paid attention to detail. Oh, I paid a lot of attention to detail and I saved $1,000. You just skipped about 3 of the important steps. Situation sets the stage for the story. It helps put context. It helps put
Ah,
challenge. It helps put scope.
yep.
Is it a big problem, a little problem? Was it a crazy situation or relatively controlled? Task. Task is a goal, an objective, something that you were going to have to achieve. And remember, we talked in time management. Go back, folks, and look at that time management
Yes.
podcast.
We'll put that up.
That there's a difference between wishes, dreams, aspirations, and goals and objectives. And what's the difference? The difference is a goal, a task, an objective has 2 key elements: time and measure. I want to lose weight is a dream, it's a wish, it's an aspiration. I'd like to lose weight. That's nice. How much? By when? 5 pounds in a month. It's achievable, it's measurable, it's a smart goal. So if I'm telling my story to you about a good skill that you're interested in, hey, tell me about attention to detail. I first set the stage. Well, here was the background.
Mm.
Then I go into the task. I have to be explicit and say, I had a month to evaluate our spending with the objective of trying to cut out $5,000 out of our spending plan. Very clear what my task was. Then I jump into the heart of my storytelling. Here are the actions I took.
Mm.
Actions, plural. Here's what I did using the skill of attention to detail. So here's what I did, attention to detail. I went and studied the old budgets. I went and studied our past performance. I went and critiqued each of the managers and found out from them what they thought might be opportunities. I went and reviewed with them where they were successful, where they were not successful. Here's my punch list of 6 or 8 things I did, paying attention to detail all along the way. And how did it turn out? What does the result have to compare to? The task. My task was in a month, save $5,000. But my story ends with the result saying, in 3 weeks, I found $10,000 of savings. That becomes a memorable story, something you can take to the
Yeah.
bank.
Yes.
Because I
Yeah.
followed the flow of anticipating the skill. So they're going to ask me about attention to detail. I then rehearsed in my mind the flow of here was the context. The company was losing money. We had to find out a way to save some money. The task I had was a month to save $5,000. Here's the actions I took, and the result was in 3 weeks I saved 10,000. That's a story that becomes memorable. It's like the story about the Roman walks into the bar. Have you heard this one?
No.
Goes into the bar, and the bartender says, would you like some beers? Yeah, how many? Puts up his 2 fingers. So the bartender says, 2 beers coming up. He says, no, 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 no. I want five. He says, five? He says, I'm a Roman numeral, five. I want 5 beers.
Ah,
Short 30-second example of why flow makes a story work. Why does a joke work? Because it has a situation that sets it up. You go through the details of the story, and then the punchline ties to how it was set up. Telling your star story is about flow, it's about process, it's about STAR, situation, task, action, result. And when you end up anticipating the questions they're going to ask by brainstorming a long list of skills, narrowing them down to the 8 or 10 specific skills, tacking on 2 or 3 generic skills like initiative and learning fast, preparing for each of those questions. And by the way, I'll have for you in your materials that you can hand out to folks, we can have a spreadsheet that has here are skills they're interested in, situation, task, action,
oh,
result. You can make your own spreadsheet. I have samples.
oh,
You don't have to write a book. They're just bullet points. These are make believe, but when you're doing your own, it's your own bullet points of your life so that when the time comes to tell the story, you can do your 2-minute drill of saying, here was the situation, here was my task, time and measure, here are the actions I took, here was the result. Look how well it compared to the task
wow.
that was in front of me. You will have the most powerful, impactful interview. And when we get to podcast 3, when we talk about resumes, here's the sneak peek. It's going to be take the skill and put the result together. That's your resume. My attention to detail saved 10,000 bucks in 3 weeks. That's your resume. Copy paste from that worksheet.
Wow.
So Brad, we've taken just a little over a half hour. I don't want to wear out our listeners, but this is the teaser. Next week, next podcast, we're going to talk about when you have these stars ready, how you build them to be ready, not just for question and answer about tell me about your skills, but there are 5 steps to a resume, to an interview. We're going to take your listeners through each of those 5 steps from first impressions to the thank you note when they leave and how to ace each part of the interview. That'll be podcast 2, and podcast 3 will be resumes. I promised at the beginning, Brad, I'll give you 3 tips that your listeners can take to the bank tonight, now, today. 1, do a skills brainstorm for yourself. Whatever job you're preparing for, write down a bunch of skills. Think about the technical ones, think about the generic ones, and get a list. If it's quick out of the box, you might only get 5 or 10. That's enough to start. Later, you can
Skills
look at
that I'm good in or skills that they're looking for?
the second because it's not about you, it's about them. Thanks for bringing us back home. Second thing you can do 1 star. Build 1 star. Write a little bullet of here was a situation where I needed to use that skill. Here was the task, the time and measure that I had to do to solve that problem with
Mm.
that skill. Here are the actions I took, and here's my result, and the result compared favorably to my task. Do the skills, build a star. And the last tip, read the book. It's got more detail. No, there's obviously there's more detail in there that will help you get better prepared. And in all of my books, I say just write me at artielinworth.com and at gmail.com. Brad, I hope this helped you and your listeners on how to prepare at home. Next podcast, the stages of an interview, and the third one will be how to get your resume to be as best it can be.
I will have to say, everybody listening, that Artie just gave you his email. And of what I know of him over the years, he has the best advice of anyone I know. If you have any questions, please email him because he gets back to you before it even hits your inbox. So, Artie, great having you on today. Thank you for being so open and honest and so knowledgeable and helpful.
Thanks, and we'll look forward to the next podcast. It's always a pleasure to work with you, Brad, and I hope it's helping you folks. Thank
All
you and take
right.
care.
You take care. Thank you for listening today. Quite a segment. Hope you got as much out of it as I did and that you learned something from adversity, not giving up, that there's always hope no matter what the circumstances. Please subscribe to our channel so you get all the latest updates and you can see all the past great stories of people who have overcome. I'm Brad Henry. Thank you for tuning in.